Number 10. Robert Wrathben.
Wrathben worked in the 77th Precinct, and by 1984, he was the ringleader of a group of corrupt officers who were known as the Buddy Boys. The Buddy Boys regularly robbed money and narcotics from dealers in Bed-Stuy, then resold the drugs that they stole. During only a 3-month period in 1986, Wrathben was accused of stealing $4,000 in cash, 61 vials of crack, and up to 5 pounds of marijuana from drug dealers in the Bed-Stuy area. After Wrathben's partner, Henry Winter, was busted for accepting a bribe from a cocaine dealer, he agreed to cooperate and began wearing a wire, and recorded conversations with Wrathben in which he spoke about numerous illegal raids and robberies. On November 6, 1986, the 77th Precinct scandal was uncovered, and Robert Wrathben was indicted with 10 other officers. Wrathben was hit with 41 criminal charges. He was later found guilty of conspiracy, burglary, grand larceny, and narcotics possession, and in 1987 he was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in prison.
Number 9. George Nova.
Nova was an officer at the 30th Precinct in Harlem, which was where the Dirty 30 scandal took place, which was one of the biggest cases of police corruption in New York City history. Nova was high on the list of the most corrupt officers in the precinct, and he frequently robbed drug dealers and extorted them for payments. He and other officers also hit spots, which meant gaining access to a drug dealer's stash apartment, then stealing whatever drugs, money, or guns that they found. For years, Nova was accepting bribes and resold the cocaine and guns he stole from stash spots to other drug dealers. He also planted evidence on people and gave false testimonies at dozens of criminal trials, which resulted in many convictions. Nova was the first officer from the 30th Precinct to be busted and agreed to cooperate and wear a wire to record other officers. His undercover work set off a ripple effect, which implicated many other cops in the scandal. In 1994, 34 officers from the 30th Precinct were indicted, which later resulted in 30 convictions and varying sentences. Due to Nova's cooperation, he only received 1 year in prison.
Number 8. Kevin Nannery.
Kevin Nannery, also of the 30th Precinct, was the highest-ranking member involved in the Dirty 30 scandal. Nannery was a sergeant who led a group of rogue officers known as Nannery's Raiders, who did more extorting and robbing of drug dealers than actual police work. Nannery and his raiders often hit spots and resold the contraband that they stole to other dealers. He also gave drug dealers the names of people who made complaints against them, putting their lives in danger. Nannery profited well off of his raids and received a cut from his subordinates. He also gave false testimonies at the trials of those he arrested for various crimes, which resulted in numerous convictions. Nannery was the last Dirty 30 cop to be arrested, and he cooperated and implicated other officers in the scandal. In 1997, he was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in prison.
Number 7. Mark Tebons.
Tebons of the 40th Precinct in the South Bronx was a highly decorated homicide detective known for cracking big murder cases. However, behind those arrests were often illegal tactics in which he threatened or bribed eyewitnesses to make false claims against people. Tebons' most notable case was that of the Wild Cowboys drug gang, who had a vicious run on Beekman Avenue in the South Bronx in the early 90s. One particular family who lived in the same building where the Wild Cowboys operated were offered immunity and payments by Tebons to implicate gang members in unsolved homicides. The family's false testimonies at trial resulted in numerous gang members being convicted of murders that they didn't commit, with some of them being sentenced to over 100 years in prison. Numerous other people have accused Tebons of framing them for murders. Tebons retired from the police department in 2014, and the following year, in 2015, he committed suicide. It's said that he was shielded from any criminal charges during his career due to him being part of a heralded homicide unit led by the assistant DA. Reviews of the many homicide convictions that resulted from his investigations are still ongoing.
Number 6. Michael Dowd.
Dowd was stationed at the 75th Precinct in East New York, Brooklyn, which was one of the city's deadliest stations, and regularly averaged over 100 homicides per year.
Dowd first began stealing cash from crime scenes, which escalated to robbing drug dealers. Then soon he began dealing drugs himself. By 1986, he was working with Dominican kingpin Adam Diaz, who allegedly made as much as $1 million per week trafficking cocaine. Diaz paid Dowd $8,000 a week to tip him off about incoming raids and to help him transport drug stashes all over New York. Dowd also conspired with dealers to traffic drugs and began a cocaine ring in Long Island along with his partner Kenneth Urell and other officers. He was also a heavy cocaine user himself.
Dowd and his dirty cop crew were also robbing rival drug dealers for Diaz. With profits from his personal drug dealing, payoffs, and robberies, Dowd claimed that in the early 90s he had earned as much as $68,000 in a single week. He spent lavishly, driving expensive cars and also purchasing homes in New York and Florida.
After Kenneth Urell was busted, he began wearing a wire and recorded conversations with Dowd, which led to his arrest in 1992. In May of 1993, Dowd appeared before the Mullen Commission, and his testimony blew the roof off of the extent of police corruption within the NYPD. In 1994, Dowd was convicted of racketeering and conspiracy to distribute narcotics and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. He served 12 years and 6 months, then was released.
Number 5. William Devery.
Known as Big Bill, Devery joined the NYPD in 1878 and quickly advanced from patrolman to roundsman to sergeant, but accomplished this by paying bribes for each promotion. Soon Devery was in business with Frank Farrell, a major New York gambling figure, and protected his $3 million a year illegal gambling empire. In 1891, Devery became captain of the Eldridge Street Station in the Lower East Side after paying a bribe of $14,000. With Tammany Hall on his side, he was involved in every type of dirty deal on his turf and took kickbacks and bribes to protect brothels and gambling dens. In 1895, he was tried for corruption, and despite the mountain of evidence against him, he was acquitted, likely due to him paying off the jury. He was brought before a legislative committee who was investigating corruption in his precinct, and for the next several years, he was constantly under indictment or charged with extortion, bribery, and other misconduct, but he always managed to beat the rap. In February of 1897, he was arrested and charged with bribery and extortion, and was convicted and dismissed from the force, but he appealed his conviction and it was overturned. Amazingly, after his reinstatement, he was promoted to police inspector in January of 1898. Then the following year, he was promoted to deputy chief, then was promoted to the city's first chief of police, despite an outcry from anti-corruption advocates. In 1903, Devery and his partner Frank Farrell bought a Baltimore baseball club, which they soon moved to New York, renaming it to the Highlanders. They eventually sold the team, and in 1915 it was renamed to the Yankees, making Devery and Farrell the first owners of the team. In his later years, Devery ballooned to over 300 pounds and died of a stroke in his bathroom in 1919.
Number 4. Louis Scarcella.
Scarcella of Brooklyn Homicide North earned the nickname The Closer in the 1980s due to his reputation for solving difficult murder cases, which even baffled his colleagues. For years, defense lawyers said that this was because he threatened or coached eyewitnesses, and in other cases, he coerced people to pretend to be eyewitnesses. Police and court records show that witnesses often changed their initial statements after being interviewed by Scarcella.
Scarcella retired in 1999, and his work didn't come under fire until 2013, when a man named David Ranta was released after serving 20 years in prison for the murder of a rabbi. A witness had come forward and said that Scarcella had instructed him to pick Ranta out of a lineup, and afterwards an investigation was opened up into his activities.
It was found out that Scarcella and his partner Stephen Camille had let violent inmates out of jail to smoke crack and visit prostitutes in exchange for incriminating Ranta. It was also uncovered that Scarcella repeatedly used the same crack-addicted woman as a witness to testify in several of his murder cases. Dozens of people who were sentenced to prison due to the work of Scarcella have filed motions, and to date, 21 people have had their convictions vacated.
Scarcella has never been charged with any crimes, which his victims say is because he was enabled by the NYPD, prosecutors, and judges in order to solve cases. To date, 17 people convicted by Scarcella have received lawsuit settlements totaling over $110 million. It's believed that no single law enforcement officer in history has cost taxpayers that much money due to their misconduct. Investigations and lawsuits surrounding Scarcella's cases are still ongoing.
Number 3. Peter Calabro.
In 1975, Calabro became a detective in the citywide autocrime unit, which was headquartered at the 109th Precinct in Flushing, Queens. That was also when Calabro began working with the vicious homicidal gangster of the Gambino family, Roy DeMeo, who also oversaw the biggest car theft ring in New York City. DeMeo was leading a crew of killers known as the DeMeo Crew, who murdered and dismembered dozens of people in an apartment next to the Gemini Lounge bar in Brooklyn.
In 1975, a rival of DeMeo's in the car theft business named Andre Katz went to speak with detectives in the autocrime unit, and afterwards Calabro informed DeMeo. Katz was later kidnapped and taken to a closed supermarket in Queens, where he was stabbed to death and chopped up into pieces. During the coming years, Calabro helped DeMeo maintain his ring by feeding him intelligence about investigations and informants. He was also taking payoffs from other criminals and earning well from his illicit activities. He bought an expensive home in Saddle River, New Jersey, which was purchased under a family member's name.
On July 24, 1977, the dead body of Calabro's estranged wife, Carmela Calabro, was found off the waters of Sandy Hook, New Jersey. She was last seen with Peter in Brooklyn a few days earlier, and her family always believed that he had killed her. Carmela's brothers allegedly went to speak with Gambino soldier Sammy the Bull Gravano about getting payback. At around 2 a.m. on March 14, 1980, Calabro was returning to his home in Saddle River after completing his night tour, when another car pulled up alongside him and blasted him to death with a shotgun. It's alleged that the man who shot Calabro was New Jersey hitman Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, who was given the contract by Gravano.
There's one story about how DeMeo was meeting with Calabro, and after he left, he turned to one of his associates and said, "A lot of people got clipped because of that guy." Roy DeMeo and his crew were alleged to have committed as many as 100 homicides, so there's no telling how many murders resulted from the information that this accused wife-killing dirty cop gave to the mob's most prolific murderer.
Number 2. John Cuff.
Cuff was an officer in the Bronx Housing Authority Division, and soon after joining the force in 1982, he got involved with the Preacher Crew. The Preacher Crew was a violent drug gang who robbed, extorted, tortured, and killed people in the Bronx and Harlem.
It was led by the vicious Clarence Preacher Heatley, who was known as the Black Hand of Death. Cuff moonlighted as Heatley's bodyguard, driver, and enforcer, and took part in murders of both rivals and crew members. Most of the victims were killed and dismembered in the basement of a building in the Bronx. Cuff's police partner disappeared and was never seen again, with many believing that Cuff killed him and then had him dismembered because he learned about his illegal activities.
In 1987, Cuff was dismissed from the police force after being caught in a robbery and failing a drug test, but he continued to carry out murders for Preacher.
On November 14, 1996, Cuff was indicted with 17 others on several dozen charges and was facing a possible death sentence. In 1999, he pleaded guilty to federal charges that he killed 10 people, although some believe that the number may be significantly higher than that. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Number 1. Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa.
Number 1 is a tie between detectives Eppolito and Caracappa, who were known as the Mafia Cops.
Louis Eppolito was born into a mafia family. His father, Ralph Eppolito, was a Gambino associate, and his uncle, James Eppolito, was a made man in the Gambinos, while his cousin, Frank Santoro, was a made man with the Bonanos. From the time Eppolito joined the force, he was using his position to assist mobsters. Stephen Caracappa had been friendly with mafiosos since his younger days, and after rising to detective, he ironically helped to set up the NYPD's Organized Crime Homicide Unit, but by then he had already turned to crime. Beginning in 1985, Eppolito and Caracappa were on the payroll of the brutal boss of the Lucchese family, Vic Amuso, and his demented underboss, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. Throughout the 1980s, they received thousands in monthly payoffs to pass along inside information and also carried out murder contracts. In 1986, the duo kidnapped an associate of the Gambino family named James Heidel and handed him over to Casso so he could kill him.
They also used their police database to track down the address of a rival of Casso's named Nicholas Guido, but instead they pulled up the address of another man named Nicholas Guido. On Christmas evening 1986, the innocent Nicholas Guido was shot dead in front of his Brooklyn home. Caracappa and Eppolito also fingered numerous people to be killed in a garage on Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn. On the orders of Casso, in November of 1990, the two pulled over a Gambino named Eddie Lino off the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn and shot him 9 times.
After years of investigation, both Caracappa and Eppolito were arrested in March of 2005 and charged with dozens of criminal counts, including murder and conspiracy. On March 6, 2009, they were found guilty of committing 8 murders, 2 attempted murders, 1 murder conspiracy, obstruction of justice, drug distribution, money laundering, and repeatedly disclosing sensitive law enforcement information to mob bosses.
Eppolito was sentenced to life in prison plus 100 years, and Caracappa was sentenced to life plus 80 years. Caracappa died from cancer in prison in 2017, and Eppolito died in prison in 2019.